Welcome to Let's Chat with Shelley Stephenson, Pastor Shelley Stephenson. I love being a pastor. I love being able to talk to people about their healing, about how Jesus Christ has saved them and set them free and helps us walk through our everyday struggles in life. We have been talking about the topic of narcissism. The more that I talk to people and the more that I study, it to me is something that a lot of people don't talk about. I recently realized that my father had been a narcissist. There's just a lot to it. So today we have something very special. We have someone who is going to share with us her experience being married to a narcissist and living that life. And because of the delicacy of the subject matter and to, protect relationships, we are going to be anonymous today. So I love that in a way. I don't love that you have to do it, but I love that you said, you didn't just say no, I can't. So I really love that. This young woman who will be just walking through some things with us and sharing some things with us. I do know her personally. I can tell you that she is highly intelligent. She is sweet. She is a fun person. She is truly a woman of God. She is a go getter. And, through it all, you seem to enjoy life. So I want to say to you, first of all, congratulations just for all your accomplishments. And I won't name all those because we're trying to get to the heart of the matter. Narcissism. When you reached out and you had watched I think a podcast or maybe read a blog, you shared your story or parts of your story with me, and it moved me deeply because of the person that I know and I've seen. And I know you from spending some time together. Not We weren't in each other's inner circle, but I knew your character. I knew how you lived your life. So when I heard what you had to go through on a daily basis, it moved me. So can you give us a little history about the relationship that you're currently in? How did you meet? What did you like about him? So share a little bit about that
Sure.
with us, please.
And I just also want to say thank you for this opportunity to be on here and respecting the anonymity and all of that, and for all of the nice things you just said about me. So thank you very much for that. This relationship, I am married, and I have been married to my husband for 20 years. Actually, it was just 20 years back in May. We met when we were both in college, actually. It was freshman year of college. We went to a small private university in Ohio, and he was actually chasing after a friend of mine, trying to date her, which was a fun dynamic, because he did not know that she had a boyfriend, back home where she was from. So one day after our weekly chapel services at this university, he asked her out to lunch. And, she hadn't told him that she had a boyfriend. And she was like, well, this is awkward. So she grabbed me and said, hey, you're coming to lunch with me. And I said, okay. And that is how
That's
we
too
met.
funny. Very funny.
Yes. So, and then the three of us actually hung out as friends for probably about 2 months. And then one weekend, she, went back home for something, and he asked me out on a date. So that was our first date when we, officially started dating and all of that. It was about the middle of our freshman year of college.
So that was kind of a strange dynamic for you to work through, but it turned out that you ended up really going forward in the relationship. Now, you kind of brought up something that piqued my interest. So you went to, was it a Christian college? And um, your husband, obviously born again, a Christian?
Well, that is a great question. So I can easily answer the Christian college one. Sort of. It is a private university that is affiliated with a Christian denomination. So they had a lot of
Okay.
religious activities on campus. There was no like it was not required to go to chapel or anything, but I was very involved in the religious life. I was born and raised in the church. So, my family has been, active, involved in churches. I have a few, ever since before I was born, many generations back. And there's a few pastors in the family, that type of thing. Now my husband's family, they're a bit less religious. He has we'll say grandfather that was a pastor, and so they would attend church for a few years here and there. When the grandpa was pastoring locally to them, and then he would get called to a different church, and then they wouldn't go. And but then in so I didn't meet my husband until we were in college, but when he was in high school a friend of his invited him to go to church with him. And so my husband said, sure, and he started regularly attending that. And, when we met, me being a believer, I definitely wanted to get married to someone who was also a Christian. That's a
Absolutely.
non-negotiable.
Sure.
I was like, if this person does not have faith, I don't care. We're not getting married. Like that was a standard I had.
Sure.
And everything at the time pointed to the fact that, yes, he was a born again believer.
Okay.
Um,
That's
now
why
I
I asked you,
Yeah,
because knowing your character,
yes,
knowing your upbringing, I knew in my heart that you would never marry someone who wasn't a confessed Christian or born again. So
correct.
you, in your heart, you said, this man is born again. So um, I will step into this relationship and go a little bit farther with that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we dated for it was just about 2 years until he asked me to marry him, and I knew it was coming. Like we had already had that conversation and all of that, and he made me pick out my own ring, so I knew it was coming at some point, but I still told him he had to surprise me with that. And so we got engaged during our junior year of college, and then we got married shortly after graduating, after senior year. So that was 20 years ago, which is hard to believe.
That is very hard to believe. That is
Yeah.
very hard to believe. So, you said this is going to be our life. It's going to be a beautiful life. We're going to live for the Lord, and we're going
Mhm.
to be in any kind of servitude to God and ministry to God. And I'm sure you had hopes and dreams regarding your relationship. Have any of those like come to fruition, or did something happen that distracted them, or where are you? Let me ask you, in your personal pursuit
Mhm.
of life and the joy of life, how do you deal with what you deal with on a daily basis? And here's where I want you to start. What do you have to deal with? And when you share that with us, I think within that, you can share with us how you know that you are living with a narcissist or married to one. Because some people, I'm like, somebody can just be a jerk, and that doesn't mean they're a narcissist, or they can just
Correct.
be a pompous, whatever, and they're not a narcissist. So, how did you come to that realization, and how do you deal with it?
So there's a lot I could go into there. So when we first got married, again, 20 years ago, um, I had a very different path for my life in mind than what I now know God had. My plan was so I studied engineering in my undergraduate, and then my plan was to go on and be a professor of engineering, master's degree, PhD, the whole thing. I did that for the first year that we were married. I pursued a master's degree in engineering, and then God very clearly derailed that the following summer. And so about it was about a month after we celebrated our 1-year anniversary, I found out that my funding from the university I was attending was getting cut because I had an assistantship and all of that. It's no fault of my own, just budget cuts because that's how things work. And right about that same time, my husband got laid off from his job. Now, the job that he had, it was not, his dream career or anything like that. It was, I mean, it was a job. It helped us pay the bills, all of that. But that experience, looking back, now obviously I did not know this at the time, but looking back on it, that experience for him was, I think, one of the first triggers that really started bringing out his narcissism. And just
Okay.
that experience of, and because he got laid off and it was, I mean, it's questionable whether it was laid off or fired, because there was a person at that company that just basically had it out for him.
Okay.
Um, so it was a big hit for him emotionally.
Sure.
Um,
Being a man, that even intensified.
yeah, yeah, and again, looking back, there are so many things I know now that I didn't know then. So my husband's father passed away when he was 7. And so there is a lot of maturing that he did not do because of that and just dealing with that. He still hasn't really dealt with that well. But again, when I was, in my very early 20s when we got married, I didn't know any better. I was immature myself. And
Sure.
so, yeah, so that after our first year of marriage was great. But then it was, the year after, after that, when he went into a deep depression for a number of months, because it was about 8 months until he got another job.
Wow.
Yeah, and during that time, so his degree in college was he got his degree, but it wasn't really what he wanted to do. But because, you pay all this money for your degree and everything, he sort of kept pursuing that field. So there were some tests he had to take for some additional certifications, and he got to one of those tests and just could not pass it, which again, more blows to his self-esteem, more depression. Meanwhile,
Exactly.
I was being the breadwinner, using my engineering degree, to work a job where I had a very long commute each way to get to, but, it was a job. Of course, we had just bought a house, all of that kind of stuff. So, at that point is when he really started struggling, and back then, I mean, I had no idea it was narcissism. I was just seeing depression, and I was frustrated with it because, he's sitting at home all day not doing anything, and here I am, I have this, like, more than an hour drive to work each way. I'm working full days. I still have to clean the house, cook the meals, all that stuff, and
Sure.
it was very frustrating.
Absolutely.
And, we're also dealing with, like, we had just bought a house, it needed repairs. I mean, he's very good with that, and he's taught me a lot about repairing houses and all of that. Um, but I mean, there was a lot of stress in life, and I kept putting that stress on myself, you
Sure.
know? He wasn't taking responsibility for everything, so I just kept taking responsibility for everything because honestly, I didn't know better, and I wasn't able to see that situation, from a proper perspective
Well,
because
sure,
I just
because there
yeah,
was so much going on. You could say, okay, he's down because, he doesn't can't find a place in the workforce, and he might have got fired, he might have got laid off, he can't get into this field, he can't pass these tests, and
mhm,
you're kind of like, that's a reason. So it's
yeah,
like he's struggling through these things for a reason, but it was much different, much darker maybe, or it brought forth results that surprised you that you wouldn't have expected.
right, right, and we were active and involved at a church at that time, and that was good. I mean, we had, right after we got married, we started looking for a church. It was literally, we started, at the A's, and we, like, ended up at a church that started with A. Like, it was, like, the first I
That
think the
is
second one we
funny. that
tried.
that is too funny.
So, yeah, and
Amen.
we were very involved there and everything, and I was, still trying to figure out, "Okay, what am I doing with, engineering or whatever?" And it was right in that time that God told me I should go to seminary, and I was like, what?" I was raised in a denomination where women do not go to seminary. Women are not
Understood.
pastors. So that was a major like internal conflict for me to work through because God made it very
Absolutely.
clear this is what he wanted. And I was like, what?
Wow.
So I became okay with that. And it was at least another year after that until my husband was okay with that.
Sure.
So
Yes,
that was
let's
another one.
admit it. There aren't too many people that go from being an engineer to a pastor to a
Right.
woman in ministry, and that always intrigued me because of the brilliance in the area of engineering and math, and you have a very analytical mind, but yet you took that leap. So I know, like you
Mhm,
said, you were having internal struggles, not really struggles, but trying to reconcile
mhm.
a lot of things in your spirit, your heart, your mind, and you're still dealing with things on the other end, but yet you always play this cool cat. You're just like, you always seems like there were no stresses in the world, so nobody would have really known what you were going through.
Mhm. And that was a big part of it, was, I didn't really understand necessarily what was going on, in my relationship to even be able to articulate it to someone else. Because what I've learned since then is, I kept taking all of that on me and thinking this is my
Mhm.
fault.
Great
You
point.
know, of like, okay, well, clearly I'm not doing something right in this marriage. How
Mhm.
can I support my husband better because clearly he is struggling.
Right.
As an engineer, I am a problem solver by nature.
Right on.
And I saw this problem and I'm trying to solve it and I'm not able to solve it, and so that was frustrating for me.
Sure.
Because, I'm not able to fix him and I
that
wanted to keep
that's good.
trying.
That's good. That's a good point.
But,
Wow.
I mean, even at that point in life, I still had no idea he was a narcissist. So, we continue on in life. I did go to seminary. We actually relocated for that. And there's other complications and stories going on there. But so we had bought a new house. We were trying to sell our old house. It was not selling. My husband told me, "You cannot start seminary until we sell that house." And that was the first time that I really had to be like, "No, I have to follow God, not my husband," and that there was a
Mhm.
major conflict between what God was telling me and what my husband was telling me.
Right, right. That's tough. That's tough right there. But you knew,
Mhm,
because you are so tapped in to God, and you would put yourself through that, going to
mhm.
seminary and being who God called you to be, unless you knew that you knew that you knew. So there's a big conflict there.
Exactly, and I still worked full time as an engineer while going to seminary for my master's degree. And a lot of that was just because we needed the money. I mean, my husband had, he had gotten some other employment. Finally, by that point, I mean, he had another job situation where due to a corporate merger, he was losing his job, like, right as I was starting seminary. So,
Wow.
that was a good time.
Woo.
Yep. That was faith in God right there, which
Boy, you aren't
that
kidding.
that strengthened my faith.
Mhm.
But I don't know that it did the same for him. I think he was
Right.
just frustrated. But he was able to get into a better career field for him that he enjoys more, where he can use some of his giftings and all of that. And so that was a plus. But, went through seminary, all of that. I graduated. I kept working as an engineer and I started doing a lot of ministry stuff on the side, outside of my full-time employment. I was getting involved in some ministries and things like that. But all the while, dealing with this daily struggle of this marriage relationship of, like he's not pulling his weight in the marriage.
Yeah.
We very, very rarely had anything that could be considered a deep conversation because I know things like me choosing God over him, in the decision to pursue seminary and all of that, that was a big thing for him,
Sure.
you know.
So that he might have been brewing,
Mhm.
about that. And what I see you soaring, and I see him stuck in a way. Like you
Exactly.
said, even though he kind of got his groove a little bit, I mean, you're soaring to the mountains, and it just like, God is blessing you for your obedience, and
Mhm.
you're able to start to showcase your gifts in ministry, and he's stuck. And to me, I can, even just listening to your story and how it's progressed through the years, you can almost feel this narcissistic spirit brewing in his belly.
Yes, definitely. And that is, I mean, that's kind of how I summarize things with our relationship. I mean, you nailed it right there of essentially, we were both immature, spiritually, emotionally, all of that when we got married because I mean, we were in our early 20s. And then I did so much spiritual growing through seminary. It was like, we started out kind of equal-ish, and then I just kept growing and growing and growing, and he didn't, and that just made us further and further apart. And it
Absolutely.
was, oh gosh, probably 4 or 5 years after I got my master's that, he basically started checking out from the church.
Okay.
And that was a struggle because we had been very involved in our church since about the time I started my master's. So at that point, it was probably about 7, 8 years in, and we were both very involved in church. But I started taking on some more leadership roles, did a little bit more preaching, that kind of thing. I mean, he was doing things like, helping out in the sound booth and things like that. But then and again, hindsight's always 2020. Looking back, it's like there was a few times where things happened that he misinterpreted that caused him to just completely check out. It
Okay.
would be like somebody would say something or do something that he misinterpreted and then wouldn't listen to the explanation. It was just like, "Nope, done." And
Okay.
now I look back at that and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's a very narcissist thing to do."
Exactly. Exactly. Didn't want to deal with it. Didn't like what it was. So basically, like you said, just shut down. It's like, uh-uh,
Yep.
I'm not dealing with it. To me, it doesn't exist. And
Mhm.
almost like getting to a point where you're feeling like he thinks maybe you don't exist because he
Right.
doesn't know how to cope. There's definitely a lack of coping skills with the narcissist that I know, and I don't know a lot of them. But that's one thing, they cannot handle something that, maybe they're not in agreement with, because a narcissist, you have to agree with them 100%. They're always right, they're not wrong,
Mhm.
you can't correct them. So there are some that lash out. It sounds like your husband went the other way, he internalized
He
that.
did. Yeah, very much, kind of went inside himself and all of that. I mean, he's always been more of an introvert. I've always been more of the extrovert. So, I mean, there is that dynamic too. But yeah, and he very much just, he kinda checked out from church. He was still involved in a few other things, but yeah, he really just started checking out at that point, which was frustrating for me to see because I'm like, "What is going on here?" "Why can't we just have a conversation and move past this and grow from it?" And he was not there. So it was a few years beyond that then that again, I mean, our marriage is obviously struggling very much, because I'm just frustrated with him, he's frustrated with me. We had very briefly attended a few counseling sessions, which was interesting because he did at one point, we'd probably been married about 5 or 6 years at this point. He did realize that he was struggling with depression. And
Okay.
so he reached out to a counselor, I think on a recommendation from our pastor at the time. And he went to a few counseling sessions and ended up got on some antidepressants for a little while, and that helped. He wasn't quite as moody, and the mood swings were a little
Okay.
better, so that helped both of us. But then the counselor invited me to come to a couple sessions, and I said, "Yeah, I'm all about that. That's great." And so I did, and it was a very frustrating experience for both of us because we go there, we talk to the counselor, and the counselor basically looked at me and said, "Well, yeah, you're doing everything right," and looked at my husband and was like, "Yeah, you need to work on stuff."
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and
Woo,
I'm
that
just
makes
like,
that brewing really churn, doesn't it?
"Yep, exactly," because then I'm frustrated again because I'm like, "Okay, I still can't fix this." there's something not right, but I can't do anything about it because this counselor is telling me, "Oh, yeah, you're fine."
Wow.
And I'm
Right.
like, "No, I'm not." So that was
Exactly.
frustrating.
That's
But
right.
then so it was probably 10 years after that. So it was about 5 years ago at this point that there wasn't any particular thing that triggered it. But actually I think it was an ad on, Facebook actually, where it was for online Christian counseling, and I was like, "Huh, I should look into that." And so I did. And so I started meeting, with a counselor just on video chat because it worked best with my schedule. I could do it over my lunch break and all of that from my job. And, I started meeting weekly with a counselor with the intention of basically figuring out, "Okay, how do I deal with him in this relationship?" Because I was beyond frustrated. And, many people may have just left the relationship, but with my faith, I didn't feel any clear indication from God that that's what I was supposed to do.
Right.
And that's the struggle of, okay, what is, acceptable reasons for divorce in a Christian and all of that. And, I studied and pondered and prayed about that stuff a lot and just did not feel that was where I was supposed to go. So I was like, all right, I can't fix him, but I can figure out what I can do to cope with this better.
There
And
you go.
so I started seeing a Christian counselor for that. Um, and it was actually while I ended up seeing her, it was almost 18 months. We did go to, like, every other week for a while there, but it was almost 18 months, and
Wow.
it was while I was meeting with her that I had this amazing revelation moment of, "Oh my gosh, he's a narcissist." And
Wow.
that is when I figured it out. And I did some reading online, I found there was an article I found that was like 40 things narcissists do. And I was like, I'm reading through these and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, they're describing my husband." I think there was like one that only like partially applied to him, but everything else I was like, "Yes, yes, yes, that's
Wow.
a thing." And it was this amazing moment of like, "Wow,
It
that
helps you to
explains."
understand, yes, so much. It
Oh
it
my
it gives
goodness.
you clarity, and it kinda, gives you a relief because 'cause you're like, "Oh my goodness, I'm not crazy. This is truly, an issue, a disorder, a mental health
Yeah.
it's truly a real thing, and you could put your finger on it, and you
Mhm.
could name it."
Well, the biggest thing for me was the freedom of knowing. I mean, well, I would never say I'm perfect, I am not by any means, but for the most part, it's not me, it's him.
Come on.
That was the biggest thing for me was, okay, because when everybody else in my life and I'm one of those people who just loves people, when everybody else in my life seems to love me, yet my husband seems to hate me, that was my biggest, like, mental block of, "I cannot understand this and I cannot reconcile it." So
Exactly, and
once I had this, not even an official diagnosis because the counselor, like, had never met my husband, because he refused anything like that.
right.
It's I mean, obviously, yes, unofficial, but at the same time, I'm like, if the shoe fits,
Exactly.
everything I have read about narcissistic personality disorder fits him to a T, and it
Well,
was so freeing
that
for me.
that's a good place for us to stop, and obviously we need to keep talking, and do a part two. You brought out some excellent points there, so I don't want to rush through them, but there was kind of a freedom that was released to you once you were able to see what you were dealing with and what he was not dealing with. And so the next time that we get together, which is going to be here shortly. I have so many questions for you. So can you, my friend, this, I respect you immensely. Would you be able to stay for another session so we can continue this dialogue?
Of course. Yes,
That's
I'd be happy
wonderful.
to.
That's wonderful. So thank you all for listening. Once again, this is Let's Chat with Pastor Shelley Stephenson. My guest for this podcast is going to do a part 2 with me, because we know that this subject is tricky. We know that, there is a lot to it, especially for those of you that, you have your faith and you're still trying to deal with it and make sense of it. But I think that through this dialogue, that you will be able to help us and help others understand how to live through it. So God bless you all. Until next time.